The U.S. ambassador to Canada has a warning for Canadians. Pete Hoekstra says the way this country is responding to U.S. tariffs is threatening the future of our free trade agreement.
The Liberals never learn. The CBC recently discussed the ongoing trade war with the U.S. and possibility of an impact it may have on CUSMA. Welcome to the channel. If you could, please hit that like button. It really helps the video out, and please consider subscribing.
Here is Hoekstra speaking to podcaster Jasmine Lane.
Some of the retaliatory tariffs to the U.S. Are a huge irritant. We have protected the integrity of CUSMA. Okay, our negotiators have said we are not going to implement tariffs on any products that are covered under CUSMA. Canadians have said, well, those guardrails are off. Canada is calling into question the future of CUSMA. It's not the United States of America. It's Canada.
It's obviously clear that Mark Carney does not want to get a deal. The media has labeled him as some master negotiator, the Trump whisperer, but he can't even get an extension. From the U.S. ambassador to Canada and the U.S. Secretary of Commerce both coming out and telling Mark Carney this isn't the road you want to go down.
It is time for the Power Panel. Ginny Roth is a former Conservative campaign strategist, and here with me is Laura D'Angelo, an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist. Jordan, when we were talking in the break, you said that there was something about Pete Hoekstra's comments that really sort of stood out to you. I just wonder if you want to, share with us what that is.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was remarkable listening to the interview. You had the sense that he was recounting an alternative history of what had happened in terms of the notion that Canada had somehow attacked the United States using tariffs, when in fact, of course, we know that the tariff war that was launched by President Trump hit Canada first and hit Canada hardest of all of the U.S. trade partners. I was also really struck by the fact that his tone and his comments about CUSMA are increasingly pointed, and you really have the sense and the idea that there is a threat implied there, that if Canada doesn't come to heel on some of these irritants, as he calls them, like the retaliatory tariffs, that CUSMA itself, which of course is what's providing the bulk of protection to Canadian trade right now, might be in jeopardy.
Ginny, did you also sort of take away that there was a new level of pointed threat on the table there? And should that sort of shape how Canada responds to deal with the ongoing trade war?
It's a warning based on what we already know about how Trump makes deals. Trump is only going to accept a win for America. We know why he imposed the tariffs. We know what he wants. And retaliatory tariffs are only going to make the situation worse, and we are already seeing that.
I had a similar reaction to Jordan, actually. It was funny to hear him use the phrase counter tariff and then imply that that was some sort of like first volley or, first aggression. It's like, actually in the name it says counter. We were countering your tariffs. Look, I think some of the counter tariffs have been foolish from the beginning, mainly because they hurt Canadians and they hurt our economy just as much as they hurt the US, if not more, because of the proportionality of them. I also think some of the boycotts we've had in place, the Ontario government took issue with Starlink, and then Elon Musk fell out with Trump. So, I think some of the stuff that was designed to appeal to the domestic audience in Canada that was frustrated with Trump was not worth the squeeze, especially if it is becoming an irritant in the negotiations. Having said that, I don't think Trump or any of his envoys, including the ambassador, is a good faith actor in terms of how they're viewing and talking about these negotiations. They're clearly not trying to come to a fair deal. We know that they see tariffs as like a revenue stream, a way to tip the scales in favor of the US. And so I also don't think we should necessarily take the ambassador's words, or frankly anyone speaking on behalf of the US government administration and their negotiators in good faith. We're all not in the negotiating room. We don't know where things are falling apart, what Canada's willing to do and not do. And so I don't think we should overcompensate in reacting to the ambassador's comments, especially given that he's mischaracterizing so many important events.
Canada can't win a trade war with the US. The scale, the leverage, the economic independence are stacked against Canada from the start. The US GDP is around $28 trillion, while Canada is around $2.2. 75% of Canada's exports go to the US, while only 15% of US exports go to Canada. The US has already won the war. Canada just doesn't know it.
Certainly one thing that sort of stood out there, and in our conversation, in our interview that we did with him last week when he was on here, we pressed him on, this Canada's response did not happen in this vacuum. Like, this was cause and effect. It was the Trump administration came forward with, tariffs related to border security, and Canada responded. And Canada was not the one to make the first move here. What do you make of the way that the ambassador is sort of framing this conversation and trying to sell it to a Canadian audience?
Canada's counter tariffs on the US were more of a political show than a smart strategy. They raised prices for Canadians, they hit our own businesses harder than the US, and targeted symbolic goods instead of protecting key industries. With our smaller US dependent economy, it was a fight we could never win, and Canadians end up paying the price.
I mean, it really feels like the ambassador's living in an alternate timeline right now. It doesn't feel like he's watching or listening or hearing any of the same things we are. And I think, Ginny called it a mischaracterization, and it absolutely is, right? This is very clear, at least to Canadians, that this trade war was sparked by tariffs, by, threatening CUSMA overall, and by suspending trade talks at various points over the past number of months. And I think a big part of this is also Canadians recognizing and feeling like we need some leverage in these negotiations. These counter tariffs, these measures that the Canadian government are using, whether you agree with all of them specifically or not, are providing Canada with some leverage during the negotiations. And we do need that leverage, right? And I think the Prime Minister and Minister LeBlanc in particular have been clear that if we need to, we will walk some of these pieces back. I think the digital service tax is an example of that. But for now, we also can't just give everything up and end up, frankly, with a deal that isn't particularly great for Canadians, like we've seen in some of the countries that have already done that.
Unfortunately, we can and likely will, and that's not going to be the fault of the US or Donald Trump. It's because of the incompetence of the Liberal government blocking any type of economic growth in this country over the last 10 years.
Yeah, Jordan, is that something that stands out to you, that when we take a look at what other countries have been able to negotiate, that perhaps, Canada needs to be in sort of a position where, it needs to focus on what it does have in this moment, and perhaps this is something that Canadians will not like to hear. Perhaps Canadians need to get used to the idea that tariffs are kind of just here.
Well, I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that even countries that have negotiated trade deals with Trump, those trade deals aren't worth the paper that they're written on, because he's been willing, for example, in Japan, he's gone back on agreements that have been made. There's also not a lot of evidence that unilaterally disarming in terms of making concessions on things like counter tariffs or even other things like the digital services tax has done much to advance Canada's negotiating position. So in some sense, I think that probably the best outcome right now for Canada is for not a lot to happen in the moment, and hopefully move towards something a little bit more productive. But the real elephant in the room is the CUSMA renegotiation that's coming, and it's going to come very fast. And so obviously with the proportion of goods that are covered by that, if that were to be weakened and attacked in the same way that we've seen President Trump attack Canada with sectorally specific tariffs, we would be in for some really serious economic trouble.
It's very interesting to see how the CBC's tune has changed from elbows up to now trying to convince their viewers that no deal is a good thing, and for them to get used to the idea of tariffs. No matter what happens with Carney and the Liberals, they back him, even at the cost of Canadians. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.